Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. We're so glad to be able to come before you for our leadership. Let's talk with Ghoulie. And guess what? I'm Ghoulie. Let's talk with Ghoulie. We're going to have my friend, newly found friend, if I must say, John Maxwell. John and I met in person passing by last fall, actually, and he was doing a podcast with Mike King, or RVA, and he was ahead of me. I've never seen him, or actually, I don't think I've heard about him. And so he went in, and after him, I think we spoke or just shook hands. Then I came in, and come to find out, John and I are with the same coalition, the CSAPC, Chesterfield Suicide Awareness Prevention Coalition, where we meet once monthly, virtually, and sometime in person. And he does a great work. And with our ministry, Simple Balance Life Ministry, presenting this part. And so we kind of connected, but not realizing about a year and a half ago, I went to his church not knowing him. St. John United Presbyterian Church. Hope I got that right, John. And through Llewellyn, and we were having the new teachers coming to this area in Chesterfield County, teachers from other countries, and we were helping them out. And Llewellyn Church helped as well. And then come to find out recently, she said, "You having John Maxwell? He goes to our church." Well, John and I again pass how we can pass each other and not knowing it. So got in contact, and John was delighted to come and present some information. And we just thank God for that. And I kind of got ahead of myself. But let's start out in prayer. Father God, in the name of Jesus, we thank you for blessing us to come together this afternoon for leadership. If we're concerned about leadership, and especially for you, then you're concerned about us in leadership. We just thank you for this presentation tonight, that it will all go well according to your will. We pray. Amen.
Amen. Good evening, everyone. I'm going to bring to you a quick script coming out of Matthew, the 20th chapter. And I'll start at the 25th verse, and it reads, "And Jesus called them unto him and said, Ye know that the princes of the Gentiles exercise dominion over them, and they that are great exercise authority upon them. But it shall will not be so, but whosoever will be great among you, be your minister. And whosoever will be chief among you, let him be your servant. Even as the Son of Man came not to be ministered unto, but to minister and to give his life a ransom for many. This is out of Matthew, the 20th chapter, verses 25 through 28, out of the King James Version. We thank God for his word.
Thank you, Pastor Jay. And now, as I said, I'm so glad that John and I were able to cross paths, and he was excited about coming tonight. And I was excited about him coming tonight. John is the chair for the Veterans Community Network of Central Virginia. And we're going to talk about community leadership, more important than ever. And hopefully he will share a little bit about his background. And when I read it, like, wow, that is really awesome. So again, do this for me. Share our monthly leadership and mental health, to share it and join it. Let the people know on the first Thursday of the month, we have leadership. The third Thursday of the month, we have the mental health, and all can participate. So please share that. So at this time, John, I'm going to give it over to you. You can reintroduce yourself and tell a little bit about yourself, and then you can go ahead on and do your presentation. Thank you very much.
Well, Reverend Gooley and Pastor Jay, thank you so much for having me here. It is, as you mentioned, it is a thrill to be here. And I think I would want to start out with something that I learned when I was at the Naval Academy in probably my first summer. And we have these things called the laws of the Navy. And the third law of the Navy, and it's not exactly perfect, but it does apply here. And it's the third law of the Navy says, take heed what ye say of your seniors, be your words spoken softly or plain, lest a bird of the air tell the matter, and so ye shall hear it again. And so when it comes to community, because of the size of our community, this is undoubtedly a lesson that we all have to learn. Because as you just described, Reverend Gooley, our paths have crossed a couple of times, and we didn't even know it. And so it's wonderful. This really is a good and close community here, this Richmond and the Tri-Cities area, and it's a great opportunity for all of us to work together. So. And I'm going to weave my background in a little bit here, but I wanted to really lead off with this concept of community leadership. And there are all kinds of people and companies that provide advice on leadership. I mean, there's somebody by my name has a C in the middle. There's a John C. Maxwell, and very famous leadership guru, and not to mention all the other coaching establishments that provide this advice. And they'll tell you how to lead a team. They'll tell you how to lead a big organization, how to lead your kids, how to lead yourself, even how to lead your dog. But often you really don't hear about why you should be leading, and then even less combined with, well, who should you be leading? And then what are you really trying to achieve through that leadership? Because the why, the impact, that's what really matters. And leadership is super hard. It takes a long time sometimes to create the impact you're shooting for. You always have setbacks. Our best leaders are self-reflective, but they carry immense doubt because you just never know if you're doing the right thing. And you have to disagree with folks. And that's not easy too. If you have a non-confrontational personality and you're not comfortable having hard conversations, being a leader can sometimes be very, very difficult. We see all kinds of examples of leadership on television at the national and the state level, big business leaders. We see local government. But what we often don't see is these community leaders who are on the ground making things happen day in and day out. And so I think it's so important to discuss this concept of community leadership, because it is amazing what you can accomplish and what you can influence just by by focusing your energies at the community level. So we're going to delve into that tonight. For those that were on for the February 6th show, you will see some things, some themes that Dr. Deanna Rios talked about, some things that resonate and that dovetail nicely into the things that I'm going to talk about here. And so I'm just very grateful for this series, and the timing couldn't have worked out better. You know, my story of leadership really goes back to my time in the Navy. I had 28 years in the Navy. I was a P-3 Naval Flight Officer, and this is a land-based multi-engine propeller-driven aircraft that was designed to chase submarines. And at some point in time, we spent a lot of time over Iraq and Afghanistan doing some surveillance and helping out our troops on the ground. But I led small teams and then all the way into big organizations. I ended up as the chief of staff of an aircraft carrier strike group. And so that was my big organization leadership, and as well as commanding a squadron. And I, along the way, or I should say, and after I left the Navy, I've had a couple of jobs in private industry where I thought I knew what leadership was, and I learned some interesting things about leading in a civilian workplace that I didn't really expect, and I should have anticipated, but I didn't really expect. But I also was able to lead the Virginia Department of Veteran Services for a couple of years. Now, this is an agency, a Commonwealth of Virginia agency that I didn't know much about before I took over this job, but here's an agency it's now over 1,000 people. When I was there, it was about 850 people that ran the gamut of providing benefits to nursing homes, to cemeteries, and a war memorial. So all kinds of work that was being done in support of Virginia's veterans and their families. I also saw that in COVID. I had been there about 2 weeks, and then we went into COVID lockdown. So I was affectionately known as the COVID commissioner, and as you can imagine. And so that was a really interesting time where we had to meet people where they were and truly trust folks that indeed that when they went back to their house and were doing their work, that they were getting it done. And we saw superhuman things happen. We saw people working late at night, early in the morning, while trying to teach their kids. And it was a really inspiring time to watch all of this. But this time period of leading while I was at the Virginia Department of Veteran Services, I really began to see how the federal Department of Veterans Affairs and how their programs try to reach veterans from a national level. I saw what the state was doing. But one of the things that I didn't see, and it really was introduced to me by somebody that I'm now coordinating with on some other veterans projects, but to see what was happening at the community level. And I started to learn that while we have all these federal and state programs, that as it bled down to the community level, that it wasn't, we weren't seeing the connective tissue from organization to business, to nonprofit, to local government. And so when I left the Department of Veteran Services after a couple of years, I decided to stand up an organization that was based in a model that Big VA, so Big Veterans Affairs, provided, and it was called the Community Veteran Engagement Board. And the whole idea behind this organization is that you bring together community folks, advocates, business leaders, nonprofit leaders, government leaders, to help do a couple of things. Number one is to improve the awareness and accessibility to resources that exist in your area, and then also to help resolve some of the gaps in services. And these organizations, we've got 7 or 8 of them here in the Commonwealth of Virginia, which is pretty good, especially compared to, like, there's 4 in Texas. And the whole goal here is to really do be a resource connector and to find those gaps. And so, as you can imagine, from a veteran's perspective, we've gotten into suicide prevention. We get into transition from the military, end of life. We have put on a couple of end of life seminars. We work in the housing space. And we're also trying to find ways to help out our justice-involved veterans. And this is where I really started to see how community can impact people's lives on sometimes an hour-by-hour basis, but certainly on a day-by-day and a week-by-week basis. And then what was really cool was to see business leaders, to see nonprofit leaders, government leaders really rally around the military and veteran community here in our area, in this greater Richmond down into the Tri-Cities, Prince George County, Dinwiddie County area, and to see them to rally around them. And so, again, inspirational, but I learned a lot about community, things that I never learned while I was in the military. And so you can imagine, as I have been working in this space now for 3 years from a community perspective, I've learned a few things. I've made a ton of mistakes, but I also wanted to really kind of focus on this piece of community, since I think that's where we can make a real difference in our world and in our neighborhoods and in our lives and in others' lives today. So to set the scene a little bit, it wouldn't be any kind of a military, sort of discussion without doing some definitions and providing a little bit of context. So I wanted to talk a little bit about leadership, what it is to begin with, and a couple of different viewpoints, and talk a little bit about community and what that really means, and then talk some more about how those all come together. So if you go into Merriam-Webster, you'll see that leadership, or to lead, is to guide on a way, to direct a course or go in a direction, to guide someone or something along the way. Those are 3 pieces of leading. According to John C. Maxwell, leadership is simply influence. And what he really says is why you lead and the way you lead are what's important, because they define you. And the Navy's version of leadership, which is really interesting, and for those that work with veterans or service members, when I read this definition of leadership from the Navy, you'll very quickly go, oh gosh, the structure behind this definition is crazy. And I never realized it until I pulled it up to have this discussion here. And it really kind of fits perfectly with the military. So here's the Navy version of leadership: the art, science, or gift by which a person is enabled and privileged to direct the thoughts, plans, and actions of others in such a manner as to obtain and command their obedience, their confidence, their respect, and their loyal cooperation. So as you can imagine, if you were to take that into the civilian workplace, they'd look at you like you were crazy and they'd probably kick you out. But this kind of shapes this concept, and what's in that definition sort of shapes what our leadership principles in the U.S. military. But really what it amounts to is leadership is all about moving your team, big or small, 3 people, 3,000 people, 300,000 people, towards some kind of an objective. So we want to keep that in mind. Now, community, what does that really mean here? You can define it a couple of different ways. It is people with common interests. It can be people with common interests in a particular area. These days virtual, you may have an organization or people with common interests that are around the United States. And so maybe that's a particular community. The outdoor recreation community is one that is often referred to as community. And there are nonprofits that are at the national level that pull people together. Could be a group of people who are interested in living together within a larger society. It can be a group linked by a common policy. And this is my favorite, an interacting population of various kinds of individuals in a common location. And I think that really applies when we start talking about this work in the Veteran Community Network, but also if we start picking a geographical area like Greater Richmond, the Tri-Cities area. But really what we have here is a community is a group of people that form around a mutual benefit. Government, businesses, nonprofits, ideally all of them merging together. And And ideally, it is a group of people with different experiences, different desires, different talents and resources, and hopefully different opinions. I think we should be thankful for that, because that's how you have a really strong community, is when you have all of these different opinions. And in fact, I would argue that if you are in an echo chamber of some sort, that to some degree you're amongst a friend group. Can be a community, kind of, but I really think it's a group of friends, because if everybody's agreeing on exactly the same thing and there's nobody offering different opinions, then I'm not sure if that is a community or not, because I think that communities have diverse opinions. So now that we've defined leadership, we've defined community, this is where I want to get into this concept about how and about why we want to get into leading the community. You really can't, I shouldn't say you can't. It is difficult sometimes to change what happens at the federal level. It is difficult sometimes to change what's at the state level. We have a vote. We have the ability to communicate with our elected officials, but sometimes we are not able, certainly in the short term, to affect things that are at a high level. However, you can, and we see it day in and day out, of impacting people at the community level. I mentioned before about this work in the veteran space that I do, and how when you start rebuilding that connective tissue, then you can make things happen really quickly. And I will not argue that this example I'm about to give is a really good news story, but before the holidays, we had a veteran reach out to us, and that veteran had just lost his job. His wife had just lost her job, and it was because they had a child with a serious medical condition, and they had to kind of go all in. They had been managing some risk, and unfortunately, that risk management got out of hand. They got a hold of us, and we were able to make a couple connections that helped them financially, and then helped him get a job, and it all happened over a month. And so here is something that we were able to improve somebody's family's life, and not because we did anything special, but just because we made a couple of phone calls, and some really caring people took it upon themselves to help to try to solve this family's challenge, and they did it in very short order. I wish all the stories were that good, because we have some that are much more difficult than that. But the point is that this is the ability of the community and things that you can make happen right away. The other thing that I think is super important about community was really borne out by a report that our previous Surgeon General, Dr. Vivek Murthy, talked about. And he did a report, and his big push was that we're in the midst of a loneliness epidemic. And I want to read something from that report, because I don't want to paraphrase it, because I think it's too important. So in the 2023 report on the epidemic of loneliness and isolation, and if you want to Google it, it comes up right away. He says that loneliness is far more than just a bad feeling. It harms both individual and societal health. It is associated with a greater risk of cardiovascular disease, dementia, stroke, depression, anxiety, and premature death. The mortality impact of being socially disconnected is similar to that caused by smoking up to 15 cigarettes a day, and even greater than that associated with obesity and physical inactivity. And the harmful consequences of a society that lacks social connection can be felt in our schools, our workplaces, and our civic organizations, where performance, productivity, and engagement are diminished. Given the profound consequences of loneliness and isolation, we have an opportunity and an obligation to make the same investments in addressing social connection that we have made in addressing tobacco use, obesity, and the addiction crisis. Pretty strong words from the top doctor in the United States of America, a year or 2 years ago. So you have this ability to make impact, and then we have really what's amounting to is a serious problem with loneliness largely because of the technology. And so I think this is why it is time for us to put all of our focus, or most of our focus, into making the community better. And, how do we get to a place where our community is there so that people feel like they've got a place to turn, so that they know that their communities haven't turned on them? And really what it amounts to is to work on these social connections. We know that a socially connected community has lower levels of violence. We know that the socially connected community has higher growth economically. And we know that a socially connected community has more of a willingness to act. If you know your community and you know the people that you're with all the time, then maybe you're going to reach out and help somebody instead of ignoring it. Of course, some of the community work can lead to some bad things, or I should say the social connections can lead to bad things, and we've seen that happen. But I think that those are things that we can work on and try to really prevent or at least minimize along the way. So what is it that's so why don't we see this oftentimes in the community, right? Why don't we see these community connections? I think part of it is that creating community connections can be really difficult. We're all very, very busy. Creating community connections takes a very long time. One of the things that I learned when I was when I was in the military, I should say I didn't learn it in the military, but I learned it as a veteran. I really only came to this realization a couple of years ago. When you're in the military, you create these connections with people through intense experiences. As a plebe at the Naval Academy, my best buddies were my roommates, and it's because we had to go through all of these challenges together. So we became really tight very quickly. But that doesn't really necessarily happen at the community when you're outside and you're in the community. It takes a long time to build relationships, to learn about people. You don't see them day in and day out. You see them when you're taking a dog for a walk, or you invite them over for dinner, or you see them at the neighborhood picnic, and you have a brief conversation. So it takes a long time to build these. And so you don't really get to know folks. And when you don't get to know them, then you're a little bit hesitant to reach out to them when you're trying to work through a particular issue. You don't really have the ability to build that relationships and to build that trust, like what Dr. Deanna was talking about, is that in order to have a good leadership, you have to have relationships. Have good relationships, you have to have good trust. I think another thing that we do at the community level that's problematic is we label people. And we label people because there's something different about them, and it becomes a barrier. And even if you are one of the most social people in the world, as soon as you label somebody and you label them as different to you, that's a barrier. It becomes some kind of a barrier hurdle to having a deeper relationship with that person. So, and we see this happening at the national level all the time, in the state level, of labeling people. And I think if we can get away from that, then I think that we start to be able to create better community connections. So I was listening to a podcast. I don't know if many of you out there know Simon Sinek, and he does a podcast called A Bit of Optimism. And I listened to two. One was Trevor Noah, the South African comedian, who I find to be really funny. And I also find him to be very provocative from a thought perspective. And one of the things that he was talking about and that I took away was this discussion about people who have different views and why it's sometimes to have these hard conversations. And one of the things he mentioned was that when you're in a community and you have no choice, you have to get along. He said, look at these communities that have natural disasters. People immediately and automatically, they start getting along because they put all the other stuff away because they don't have a choice. They need each other for survival. But as soon as you don't need each other for survival, then you can go back to thinking about all those different things of why that person, you shouldn't collaborate with them. And he said, I think that the nature of the conversation has to get away from what's your position on something to what's your concern. Instead of saying, well, why do you think this way? Or I don't understand what what the problem is there, to say, well, what is the concern that you have? And I'm going to give you an example from a personal example that just happened last week. I was at a breakfast with a family member, and I don't know how we got there, but we got on the discussion of vaccines. And he and his fiance said, we are not taking vaccines. And my mom happened to be with me. My mom asked him, well, why? And he goes, well, we just, we don't think that these vaccines are we think there's a problem with them. And I said, well, what's the concern here on the vaccines? I actually used that terminology. And the response was, look, they're not, we don't think that they're tested properly. And I said, okay, I thought about that. Like, okay, well, now I understand why they push back against vaccines. And I had to look at my own experience from a vaccine perspective. I had a lot of success with it, right? Where I know other people didn't. But the point being is that I now understood from what they were seeing. And so that was a place where we could then be, and we didn't go into the conversation deeply. We, as conversations go with family members, it went off into something else. But I found that to be a place where we could have continued that conversation, where I could have gone back and researched, because now I'm interested and go, well, if their concern is testing, then what is it that they're not seeing, so that I can understand what their concern is, and then maybe that can help me to better understand that viewpoint. So, and I know that that's a little bit of a push button, hot button topic, but I found it really interesting because it happened in a family setting. So of course we didn't get in a big argument, but this idea, what Trevor Noah said was, hey, try asking what the concern was. It worked. I couldn't believe it. So, the other thing that was really interesting, same Sinek, Simon Sinek, Bit of Optimism, another podcast, and he had a psychologist on there, or a licensed, I don't know if can't remember if she was a licensed clinical social worker or psychologist. I think a psychologist. But she was talking about kids and leadership amongst children. And she mentioned that, one of the things that happens with when someone's born is they don't have all the skills to have good interactions with people. They have to be taught that. Well, to that same degree, we as adults, we're not born with the ability to collaborate. We have to be taught that. So if we haven't been taught good examples of how to collaborate, then okay, well, we're not going to collaborate well. So you can see, as you start to pull all these things together, as you address your community and build into your community, you have to approach it differently. You have to approach it from this nature of trying to create a relationship with somebody before you can then get into where you're going to go with direction, because you've got to, and you're forced to do this because at the community level, you see people day in and day out. And so unless you want to go nowhere and have no impact on your community, you have to start with the ability to build those relationships. And it has to get down to the core of trying to understand, first of all, accepting people where they are, and then trying to understand their positions at a deep level. you know, the problem, of course, with trying to build into community is that it takes a long time. You can lose advocacy. People get tired. Life gets in the way. And I mean, I had an example where we were standing up this community veteran engagement board, the Veteran Community Network, where the first meeting we had all these people come in, and people get left because they thought we didn't have good direction, and then people got bored with us because we weren't doing enough early on. And so that's the real challenge in community, is keeping people focused and keeping them on the mission. And that's a real challenge. But if you build those partnerships and you build those relationships and you build that trust amongst each other, then you can get through some of those really, really difficult times. The other thing that I think that we really have to consider from a community perspective is that anybody can lead in the community. We shouldn't wait for somebody who is a designated community leader to lead. You don't need to start a nonprofit to fix something. Really, all you have to do is find the issue or the problem that you want to fix, find a couple of people who see the same problem, and begin building that partnership, so that then you can start to work through that particular issue. It's important to agree kind of where you are now. It's important to agree where you want to go. And then that tension in the middle is the problem that you've got to solve. Now, I will freely admit that sometimes these problems are big, and you have to figure out what the right problem is to solve. And if it's the elephant, you can only eat the elephant one bite at a time. But still, you can find one piece to start with, and then you can make an impact, because we know that it's the small wins combined over time that make you successful. In the Veteran Community Network, I started out with 2 partners. We now have over 80. We had no money. We now have some money. We've had money donated to us, as you would expect from a nonprofit. We had no programs. We now have several programs, and we're working through a bunch of different things. But that's been over 3 years. And when I look at the time, I thought we were moving slower than molasses. But I look back and go, wow, we've accomplished something. And it's because we worked on the small victories. And that's what you have to do at the community level. So I really, and so that we can continue the discussion here, I'll kind of bring this to a closure here. I think that we can spend a lot less time worrying about things that are in our, what I call, locus of concern, but not within our locus of control. And we can focus on those things in our locus of control. And I'll give you another example of something that really hit hard. I saw it in social media, and Reverend Gooley, you mentioned St. John's Episcopal Church there, and there's a couple of other churches around. There's a Baptist church, there's Chester United Methodist Church, and there might be a 4th one right in that area of Chester. And I saw something on social media, and the discussion was about warming shelters, I think, when it was cold. And somebody posted on there and said, how can we have homelessness in our community when we've got 4 churches around in a corner? And I thought about that, and I started to come up with excuses in my mind, because one of those churches referenced was the one that I attend. And I said, no, that's a really, really good question. There are certainly administrative reasons why, but there is a problem that probably just needs a community solution. I don't have any idea what that looks like right now, but that's probably something that could use a community solution. And maybe that's not exactly the right problem to solve, but there's some truth in that statement. And so these are the kind of things that as a community we can tackle. It just takes passion. It takes empathy, right? You've got to be empathetic with people as they are going, whatever they're going through. You have to focus on why you're trying to accomplish something, because the why and that purpose is going to get you through this. And I think kind of back to what Dr. Deanna said, which is you've got to be transparent, you have to be authentic, but you have to be willing to listen and reflect. And without those skills, you're really not going to be able to build the partnerships and the relationships that you need to be successful. So, I thought about as I was preparing the remarks on what to call this, and I toyed with a bunch of different things. And one of those was, if you're going to lead, why not lead in your community? And I think that really does apply. But regardless, I believe in going out and serving our community. I think at the very least, you can be social, you can learn something, and you can build a relationship. And if things are going really well, you can solve a problem. So thank you very much for this opportunity, and I'd love to continue the discussion.
Thank you, John. I've got a lot of notes here. Wow. And one of the things that it was basically the last word, but I think you said it several times, is that relationship. And that's so important. I'm going to tell you, then I'll get back to some other comments. I'm going to tell you a funny story. And this over the years, have happened to me quite a few times. This was a few years ago. This particular one, we were leaving our church that we were in some years ago on a Wednesday night service, because I worked at the church, and then my wife would come from work, her job, and come to the church, and we would go home sometimes separately because two different vehicles. And it was raining real bad that night. I mean, it was bad. And I think the lights were out at the red light, at the traffic light. And so I'm out there in my bright white cowboy hat, and with the sign, with everything, I'm directing traffic. And she happened to look over like, what in the world is he doing out there? But I knew that if this didn't get resolved because the police hadn't gotten there, somebody had to step forward. And a lot of times what we do is that we're constantly waiting for someone else to do it. And the community was the whole traffic piece. And I knew something that happened soon and the police hadn't gotten there, somebody might get crazy out there. And so sometimes we got to take those risks and step out, being careful and stepping out. So when you were talking, that kind of brought that to my mind. I've had many occasions where I had to direct traffic, and the police came up and said, "Oh, keep on doing what you're doing." I'm like, oh, because I got scared. But again, we don't have, like you said, anyone can lead in the community. And we don't have to always wait for a designated person, let's say an official person, a great leader, because it may not be there. So we have to take ownership. But let me ask you this, concerning, and we're talking about, of course, community leadership more important than ever. When I read the title that you had sent to me as we were talking about, it's like, you're right. It's more important now than ever, I know, in my life, because so much has gone on. So transitioning from the military, then you were called the COVID-19 commissioner. How did you really, because military and civilian, as we know, they're different, but and somewhat the same. How do you direct those people that's under your leadership in your particular community area or your neck of the woods to continue to keep going on?
Yeah, that was, I actually, interestingly enough, I went back to some core tenets that I learned in the military, and one of them was to communicate, and was to try to understand where people were coming from. I'd get reports, and fortunately, a couple of the people that I worked with, they were pretty candid about some of the feedback they were getting. And I remember that, and so people were really concerned about the fact that they couldn't sit at their desk for 8 hours at a day. Like, I can't physically do this. Oh, by the way, the dog, the kids, my husband, we're trying to share a kitchen table. We've got one, we're trying to figure this all out. And so I thought about this and said, okay, the first thing I need to do is tell everybody in the only way I can, which is an email, and say everything is going to be okay. But here's what I want all of you to think about. Number one is that, yes, we have to continue serving veterans. That's our job. And we're going to do that. But I'm okay if however you serve veterans in your day, that you are putting in your best effort. If you're an early person and you want to work from 6 to 8 in the morning, and then your kids get up and then you feed them breakfast and do all that, and there's 3 or 4 hours before they're settled, and then you can't get back to it, then that's okay. If you're late at night, that's fine. I said, I don't expect people to sit in front of a computer for 8 hours. Get up and go outside and walk the dog. You've got to do these things to take care of yourself. What it amounted to is I said, what do I need to do as a human to be able to function? And it was the same way. I like to exercise in the morning. I need to exercise. I can't sit at my desk and answer emails from 8 o'clock in the morning until noon, take a 30-minute lunch break, and then do the same thing from 12:30 till 5. I can't do that. I have to move. So why would I expect anybody else not to? So it was this concept of trying to put myself in somebody else's viewpoint. And oh, by the way, they aren't in control of all of the policy and things that are coming along. To some degree, I had some, in some instances, not all, I at least had an input. But there's folks who were working with me who were farther away from that, and all they were was on the end of the roller coaster, just kind of wondering what's going to happen. So I tried to put myself in there. I didn't communicate as well as I would have liked to. But that was my goal, was to try to communicate and let people know that it was going to be okay. And then I told our leadership and said, hey, let's just back away from measuring things right now. Let's not worry about the metrics that we're supposed to hit. We'll keep track of stuff, but we got to figure this out. And once we figure out our new normal, then we'll get back into some of the metrics and trying to meet them. And I'll never forget a time where we tried to implement a little bit tighter control on what we wanted people to achieve. And I got a significant amount of pushback. They're like, you're asking us to do something unrealistic. And why are you doing that? What are you doing? And I couldn't come up with a good reason. And so I said, you're right. So let's back off a little bit. We can wait a little bit longer.
Wow. I'm saying wow, because I know personally, and then overall, you have many leaders just say, do it. I was talking to someone just recently and talking about leadership and community. I think was the CEO of Southwest Airlines maybe 15 years ago, 10, 15 years ago. This is the CEO. He left his office. And it was a special thing. I don't know if it was feeding the community or something. I don't recall. But he left his office and got with the people. Either hit the workers, it was some kind of, I believe, community activity, or he just want to get down to the ground floor and meet the ones on a lower totem pole. And to me, that community, and from what I heard on that news report, they appreciated him so much because he became one of them. And that community, as you said, we have various communities. That community, I mean, they were over the moon. So that's very important as a leader. And what you were saying, to listen to the community. I'll give you a good example. As a father, as a parent in the home, you have to listen to that community of the children. Me as the leader of my home, I have to, and my wife as well, to them. But as a leader of the home, this community is small, some are medium, some are, of course, large. But as a leader, I had to learn how to listen to what they were saying, and even the children when they were small. And it wasn't always the easiest thing, but I forced myself to listen. And actually, it helped me as a leader to grow. So that's very important.
Yeah, it's amazing what people will tell you if you listen to them. If you just keep your mouth quiet for closed for just a couple of minutes, and you just let people talk, oh, they will tell you all kinds of things. And it's really interesting. And you get some really great insights into your organization. And you get some great insights into your community just by sitting there and listening. I wish I would have learned that a lot earlier in my life, but and I can't say that I'm always good at it, but it's certainly when it does happen, you're like, oh wow, okay, maybe I should do that more.
Pastor Jay, any comments?
I don't know if it's going to let me talk because I have another app up as well. I'm hoping I'm not getting feedback.
Okay, good.
I don't think so.
Several
but
things.
Anyway, I wanted to say, very good presentation. I love this because I feel that, in order to connect with community, with individuals or with a team, or I like to say you always have to touch the hand before you get to the heart. So, you have to, like the two words that I love that you shared, empathy and compassion. They are very key words because we do have to put ourselves in the shoes of others so that we can, actually kind of begin to feel where they are and what they're going through. And I like the part that you talked about where people come together, when they have a common, issue or concern. And you will see them disband, like you said, quickly in those situations. And, to me, that said that there was a disconnect, right? Because I've been able to stay connected in a way to be able to come together on if I'm more genuine level, so that that relationship and that community can continue, to go forth. But I like what you said about the why. Why should we be doing this? Why should we be leading in the community? Because so many people don't feel, the first thing that most people will say, I'm not a leader and I can't do this and I'm not called to do that. But I love the fact that anyone can take on the task, and for lack of better words, I'm using this very loosely, a person on the street can be a leader, can come in, take over the task and do a job, a very, very good job, excellent job. So it's not about the title. It's not about the platform that a person holds or the position that they hold, but it's about, where your heart lies. And, like my husband said, out on the street, getting out there. And I was like, because he would always carry this, these fluorescent jackets that construction people wear. He always carried one in the car. And I'm like, why do you carry these things in the car? Why do you carry these things? Because you never know. And so sure enough, I'm coming from church and I'm coming to, I was like, that looks like that's Ghoulie. And so he was out there doing like the police and doing this and doing that, just going. And I just laughed. Oh my gosh, I just laughed. And I called the kids and it was a funny moment there. But he has always been that person who would jump out there in the community, no matter what, no matter what the need might be, he would jump out there. And so, I too have that passion and that drive, but I think he's more forward in it than I am to just gung ho go for it. I'll get in there and do it. But, I love connecting with people. I love, helping people in the process of getting to a better state, and so I just love this tonight that you shared this with us and your background of a military, from a military standpoint, because like my husband said, they're different, but they're the same because, in each instance and in each situation, people are involved and people are what is our passion, right? People are what we are here for. And so thank you so much, John. And this is my joke when I said to my husband tonight, I said, you got John Maxwell coming to teach us tonight. But I already knew that it wasn't the John C. Maxwell. I knew it was you. I said, my, what a profound name he has. And you did an excellent. he couldn't have done any better than you did tonight. So thank you so much, John.
Amen. Amen.
Well,
John,
thank
go
you
ahead.
thank you very much. I had never heard Pastor Jay. I'd never heard the before you touch the heart, you have to touch the hand, and that really resonates. And I think that is it's a really good way to move forward as we try to do this great work in the community. So thank you very much for sharing that.
Yes.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Of course. And it is so many good points. And I would encourage viewers that are on tonight, because I see those some are on. Go back and rehearse this. We never get it the first time. It's like when you're studying your lessons in school, you got to go back over and go like a test. Go back over and listen to this and share this with others. But another key point, you talked about loneliness and isolation and the profound negative effects upon people, and especially you, a veteran and working in the veteran community. I'm sure, oh my goodness, that had to be something else, because what the veterans have gone through, because we as civilians could never totally understand what those in the military go through. Even if you didn't go to war, just the fact you're in the military under that structure, it's totally different from civilian. But that loneliness and isolation, how it can affect our mental health and overall health, that's very important. So we need leaders, John, like you. We need leaders who will put themselves in the place of the people they are following, because it's very important. And you said another one, create a relationship before giving directions. It is easy to give directives. That's, generally speaking, that's very easy. But can you create a relationship, a positive relationship with the community? That's another big thing. And they don't always coincide. And so, John, thank you very much. You gave so many great points, and some of those things I can even help put in my life to try to help lead. And as you and I talked before earlier this afternoon, I thank God for where He has brought me and my family from, because, as I told you, a community. We've been here going on 46 years this year. And we've housed people of various backgrounds, people that don't look like us, people that, brought them into our home, fed people, clothed people. And without a second thought, it's just something God gave us. But then when people come back to tell us, I'll tell this real quickly. When I was working some years ago at the church that I went to, and ministry, and it was a daycare and community, and I was with the community leader in that area, and some of the kids, because they didn't have fathers, I became, I'll call it, I guess, a surrogate father. Now, these young men, and lady girls too, but some of these young men now in the mid to late 30s, and they will come, I meet them every so often. Yeah, I remember, Mr. Gooley, what you did. Yeah, Mr. Gooley, I didn't, I brought them home, and we did things and brought families home. Didn't think about it. But then years later, they remind us, like, oh my goodness. My wife and I didn't think about we're going to be these leaders. It was a need that God let us see and provided that we could have. So again, in closing, everyone can lead. You have to decide if you want to lead in a good way or in a bad way. We don't have to always wait for the so-called leader to stand up. Be safe now, especially in this climate. Be safe, be watchful, be wise. But all of us have opportunities to lead in our community. Again, from the smallest, the medium, to the largest, to the mega, we all have that position or opportunity to lead. But what you were saying, we've got to be able to create a relationship before really giving those directives. So, John, thank you very much. Thank you, audience. Thank you so much for coming on. This has been excellent, John. Again, thank you. And we will meet soon. Hopefully, we'll see each other March the 28th, where we're going to have the resilience platform or workshop at Bright Point Community College. The 28th is on a Friday. I will be one of the speakers or give my testimony and a couple of other people. And so, hey, stay with us on Simple Balanced Life, Leadership, and Mental Health, because we're all about praising and worshiping God, but helping those that are in need. Audience, thank you very much. Don't forget, on the third Thursday of this month, we will have our mental health platform. Again, thank you, John. Thank you, everyone. You have a great night and keep following us. Be safe.
Thanks very much. Great to have you here. Thanks.
All right.
Be
Good
safe.
night, everyone.
Bye.
Love you.
Thanks. Same to you. Bye-bye.
Good night.